Talk about the handling of the case. The prosecutor been under fire. Is the criticism warranted? And we will head to New York, where protesters are taking to the streets to speak out against the decision in the Ferguson case. Could Ferguson be setting the tone for what's to come in New York in the cases surrounding Eric Garner and Gurley? Plus, we'll get into the weather here. It's finally arrived here just in time to mess up some holiday travel. We'll talk about that later on in the hour. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us. And tonight, we begin in Ferguson, Missouri, where tempers flaring over the grand jury's decision not to indict Officer Darren Wilson, who was accused of killing unarmed black teen Michael Brown. Now, the public very upset. You saw obviously the scene playing out here and the St. Louis prosecuting attorney's handling of the case among the focuses of that anger. And for decades, McCulloch, he's been viewed suspiciously by members of his community. He, the prosecutor there, and a lot of people believe that maybe some of his biases could have entered the case. Whether that's fair or not, that baggage went along with it. And some apply for two things. One of the reasons that McCulloch's own personal history, his father was an officer who was killed, in fact, on the job by a black man when he was just 12 years of age. And many say that he never recovered from his father's death, or even if that was the perception out there, that would cloud anyone. Moreover, people are also questioning about the handling of McCulloch when it comes to this case here, and whether or not he should have been the person to not only handle the case, but also if he should have presented the way he did before the grand jury. And the New York Times identified 5 ways that the Ferguson grand jury process was far different from the typical cases that you'll see before. First up was the timing. A typical case takes about a day to present to a grand jury. The Ferguson case lasted 25 days, spread out over 3 months. Typical case here, a prosecutor recommends charges for the jurors to reach. Didn't happen here in the Ferguson case. Few witnesses are called in a typical case. People like investigators and witnesses. In Ferguson, the prosecution called 60 witnesses. Also, having the defendant testify before a grand jury, that's not typical either. Darren Wilson testified for more than 4 hours. And finally, grand jury testimony, traditionally, that's kept secret. But in Ferguson, all the testimony and the evidence was released, as we know, to the public. There are many critics of this process, finding precedent for their anger from, of all people here, and this surprised me today, conservative Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. In a 92 decision, Scalia wrote, "Neither in this country nor in England has a suspect under investigation by the grand jury ever been thought to have a right to testify or to have exculpatory evidence presented." And to that point, Benjamin Crump, the attorney for the Michael Brown family, he has been very vocal about his displeasure with the prosecutor's handling.
We objected back in August to this prosecutor. We even wrote a letter to Governor Jay Nixon requesting a special prosecutor to be appointed. We objected when he informed us the process that he was going to use that was different than anything else, different than any normal grand jury that you would have presented. After we, like all of you, went through as much of the information, I think it was described as a data dump, we went through as much of it as we could and saw how completely unfair this process was. We object publicly and loudly as we can on behalf of Michael Brown Jr.'s family that this process is broken. The process should be indicted.
All right, everybody, we're going to bring you into the conversation. You'll see at the bottom of the screen the toll-free number. We got to a lot of your phone calls last night. We're going to encourage you to do the same as well tonight, both on the phone lines and online as well. But before I get to the calls, let's bring in our panel. Jim Kasouras, criminal defense attorney in Manhattan, lecturing at New York Law School, visiting professor at the University of Birmingham in England. Doug Von Oist, founding partner of Carson Von Oist, focusing on corporate misconduct, selected by the Legal 500 as one of the most influential trial lawyers in the country. Jason Levin, Leventhal, founding partner of Leventhal and Klein. He, a former assistant district attorney with the Richmond County DA's office, will be talking about an important case happening out of there as it applies to this. And Richard St. Paul, civil rights attorney, a member of the National Police Accountability Project. They're all kind enough to join us here. All right, guys, let's start off with whether or not this prosecutor should have even been the one handling the case. We went into, and it's all psychobabble, we don't know how much of his father's passing, the circumstances impacted or not. But there was an argument from Jump, Jimmy, that maybe an independent prosecutor should have been appointed to this case. With the benefit of hindsight, would that have been a good call, or should have this been handled out of his office?
I think it would have been a good call under the circumstances. What is getting lost is that there has been such a tremendous erosion of the public's trust in the system and the way these matters are handled when young men and women of color are shot by police officers, white police officers, and the way these cases are handled. He's been a prosecutor for 4 terms. He has the police as his witnesses all the time. You can't appoint a special prosecutor in all instances. But in this case, with the public outcry, and then with the way he handled it, and in my opinion, abdicated his responsibility as a prosecutor to cull the evidence, review the evidence, decide whether or not it should be presented, decide whether or not there should be an indictment. When he decided he wasn't going to do that, he was saying, I'm not the person for this job. And at that point, I believe a special prosecutor should have been appointed.
You know, Jason, I've heard the argument that I've heard from both ways. Just as Jimmy said, and others as well, that, you know, he basically did a data dump here. He never wanted to indict this guy from the beginning, and if you didn't want to, this is exactly how you would have handled it. The counter has said, this is the way that a grand jury should always operate in theory. They don't, but this is ideal where you're not taking a position as a prosecutor. You're letting the grand jury, giving them all the facts and making them reach their own conclusion. You've obviously been involved. Have you ever been involved in anything remotely resembling what we saw in this case?
No, not at all. Not at all. And it's clear on reviewing the grand jury proceedings that the DA steered this case where he wanted to steer it. He made a decision. And I couldn't agree more with Jimmy that a local prosecutor cannot prosecute local cops. They work too closely with them every day. Someone else needs to get involved, whether it be the state attorney general or a special prosecutor. Some independent prosecuting agency needs to take a look at local prosecutors, not the local prosecutor that works with them every day.
Doug, you're a former prosecutor. And I know you've gone through the minutes, in effect, of it, and you can't tell the intonations and and all the things that only those 12 grand jurors saw in the room as well. But how different was this than anything that you've ever seen before?
Well, I think it was different in the sense that he took a lot of time and he presented a lot of evidence. You know, really people are criticizing this elected official for being thorough and for taking his time. You know, the people of that jurisdiction have a right to have the prosecutor that they elected or had appointed. And so if every time there's a problem, that prosecutor recuses himself because he thinks there's going to be political fallout, you have a complete shutdown of the system. So we can all be critical of this prosecutor, but we can't be critical of him for being thorough and for taking his time. I think that would be unfair.
But, you know, we all have that expression, Richard, that says you can indict a ham sandwich. And I think, you know, exactly.
Right.
And
because it's all one side.
Right. And the idea is, at least for the lay people that watch, you know, Law and Order and stuff, that if a prosecutor wants to get an indictment, he can get an indictment because he's got so much latitude, the way the system works, that he can figure out the charge he wants. He can go and tell the jury really clearly, this is the way I feel, and it makes it clear to them that a trial jury in the end will decide it. We just want to take the next step to get this thing to trial. It was really clear for this. They gave him 4 options. He never told him which one that he thought was the one that fit the crime. He wasn't even sure, when you listen, I read through almost 200 pages of it, that he believed the crime was even committed. And I think that was clearly conveyed, whether that's fair or not, that was clearly conveyed to those 12 grand jurors. I know that's not the normal way to do it, but was, as Doug said, is this maybe the right way to do it?
Look, I think we all agree that when it comes to racial issues, when there is a white police officer in a killing, especially an unarmed black individual, there is a certain skepticism among the public that justice will not be served. And I think, given McCulloch's background that was spoke about previously, the fact that his father was involved, just anything like that, he should, defer to a special prosecutor. Now, the problem in this situation is that the governor of Missouri had no power to appoint a special prosecutor. So if McCulloch wanted the case, which he did, he got the case, and there was nobody else. There was no way to remove McCulloch from the case. The other day, McCulloch could have gave it to the feds and said, "You investigate the case. You investigate the case." Remember, the FBI and the state police and other police departments were investigating this incident between Brown and Officer Wilson together. So I definitely think he should remove the case from his hands. And I think that's ultimately a mistake, because it does nothing to put back the trust in the justice system, especially among the minority community, from what McCulloch did. No matter how thorough he was, there still isn't that trust, because he should have removed himself.
We keep using the word thorough. And I have to say, I agree with you that in principle that would be nice. I'm a defense attorney. I've been clamoring for my clients to get a little bit more fairness and completeness in the grand jury. But I don't think he was thorough. Thorough is getting all of the evidence, culling through it, and then presenting it in a thorough way. I don't think he took his time. The grand jury took their time. They told him when they could meet. They told him when they were done.
Jimmy, if I could, what I didn't understand from my end was, if the prosecutor, A, thought enough here that these are the 4 charges, right, that this guy could face, why was he bringing witnesses that were going to then be discredited on the stand? If they didn't have any material value because their eyewitness accounts held no value, we knew there was no rear entry wounds here, so people said he shot him in the back, why did they even appear before the grand jury? And if he's going to give the guy 4 hours on the stand, Officer Wilson, and I'm not prejudging what he did or didn't do, wouldn't there be any logical cross-examination a little bit? I know this isn't the trial, but wouldn't there be some more logical questions that even I, who's not an attorney, would have thought to ask? I guess my point is, there's a point with putting everything out there, but there's also a point where you're not doing the process a service, I think, if you put everything that has no value there.
You're absolutely right, and that's why I agree with what Jason said. You're steering the case to a result that you want. You're absolutely right. Why are you going to put those witnesses in where they're clearly speaking not from their eyewitness accounts, but they're speaking from a different place that really has no evidentiary value? You're going to put in, listen, maybe this is the right result. Maybe it is. But the way it was done reeks of such unfairness that even if it is the right result,
could you, Jason, have done it? Could you, if you wanted to handle a grand jury case like this, would your last office let you? Would the DA let you put on a case like this if this is the way you chose to do it?
No. The elected official is going to decide exactly how he wants the case presented, and to get the result he wants to get. And 99 out of 100 times, that result will be indictment. When it comes to local prosecutors prosecuting local police officers, the result they want is no trouble.
And we're going to talk about that. And also, when we come back from the break, in addition to getting your reaction, in addition to the phone calls, you saw the toll-free number there. You can also go to Facebook and Twitter. And again, share your thoughts. I'm leaving an open-ended question as to how you believe the process went down, but also the decision and everything attached to the case here. What I'm going to get to on the other side of the break is police in the community. Last night we had a former longtime NYPD detective and also a member of an African-American clergy here talking about from the community perspective in law enforcement. But also, these guys just touched on it, that relationship here between the police and the community, and in so many cases adversarial, and how that relates to a relationship between the DA's office and law enforcement when they still have to work together. We'll talk about how that all plays into, obviously, what we saw came down earlier this week. Stay with us.